I woke up in the forgotten mountains where magical beasts roam. My wife and daughter were starving with no hope. But me and my hunting skills, facing creatures with powers beyond imagination, I vowed to bring back meat, even if it meant fighting magic itself. The last thing I remember from my old life was the flash of headlights, the screech of tires, and then nothing. I was Darren Cole, a wilderness survival instructor who'd spent 15 years teaching people how to live off the land. Now I'm someone else entirely, a man named Cian Harak, trapped in a body covered in old bruises and fresh hunger, standing in a crumbling stone hut at the edge of mountains that pulse with unnatural light. And inside that hut, a woman with hollow cheeks stares at me with desperate eyes, while a little girl, maybe 5 years old, lies on a threadbare mat, too weak to cry for food she hasn't tasted in 2 days. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it started. The headlights came out of nowhere. I was walking back to my cabin. After a late session with my advanced tracking class, 12 students who'd paid good money to learn how to read broken twigs and disturbed earth like sentences in a book. The road was dark, mountain dark, the kind of darkness that swallows everything beyond your immediate footsteps. I heard the engine too late, saw the lights even later. Then nothing. Not darkness. Not a tunnel with light at the end. Just nothing. Until I woke up choking. My lungs burned like I'd been underwater for too long. I rolled onto my side, gasping, and my hand were wrong. Too thin, knuckles too prominent. Calluses in places mine had never developed. I pushed myself up and nearly collapsed. My arms shook with an effort that should have been nothing. What the hell happened to me? Pale dawn light filtered through gaps in wooden walls I didn't recognize. I was lying on a thin mat that smelled of mildew and old sweat, in a room barely large enough to hold a grown man lying down. The ceiling was low, the beams warped with age. I crawled toward the door. Literally crawled. My legs wouldn't hold me. The wood groaned as I pushed it open, and then I saw them. The mountains. They rose impossibly close, their peaks piercing a sky that wasn't quite the right color. And there at the highest points, the luminescent mist coiled and pulsed like something alive. Faint colors shifted within it, greens that weren't natural, blues that seemed to hum at the edge of hearing. This wasn't any mountain range I knew. This wasn't anywhere on Earth I'd ever seen or studied or dreamed about. A flash hit me. Not pain, memory. But not my memory. A family compound with red-painted gates. Sneering faces around a dinner table. A man with a broad belly laughing, while others joined in, their mockery aimed at me. No, at him. At the man whose body I now wore. Another flash. Being dragged by the collar. Thrown through those same gates. While voices called. After, come back when you've produced a son, brother. Until then, seeing it all. I pressed my palm against the doorframe, breathing hard. The memories faded, leaving behind a name that felt foreign on my tongue. Cian Harak. That's who I was now. That's whose life I'd inherited. I forced myself to stand. Took stock of my surroundings the way I'd taught hundreds of students to do in survival situations. The shack had 3 rooms, though calling them rooms was generous. More like 3 sections of slowly collapsing shelter. The thatch roof was rotting through in patches. I could see sky through at least 4 holes. A cold fire pit sat in what passed for a main area, its ashes so old they'd turned to powder. I checked the grain jars lined against one wall. Empty. All of them. Not even dust at the bottom. No food stores. I found a rusted knife with a chipped blade. A wooden bucket with a crack running through it. Some rope that might hold together if I didn't stress it. No tools worth anything. No weapons. Water source unknown. My body, Cian Harak's body, was shaking. Not from cold. From hunger so deep it had become structural. My muscles had begun consuming themselves. I could count my ribs through the threadbare robe without touching them. How long had this man been starving? I found a cracked bronze mirror propped against a wall and picked it up. The face that stared back wasn't mine. Sharp cheekbones, made sharper by malnutrition. Sunken eyes that still held some spark of intelligence despite everything. Hair that had once been black, now showing premature gray at the temples. Premature aging. Constant stress. a face in its late 20s that looked 40. I touched my jaw. The reflection copied me. The wrongness of it nearly made me drop the mirror. Then something shifted. It started as warmth in my chest. Not painful, not alarming, just present. Like someone had lit a small fire behind my sternum. And with it came awareness of something I couldn't explain. Space. Empty space existing somewhere inside me. Fushed. Waiting. Like a room with no walls that somehow belonged to me and me alone. I could feel its boundaries without seeing them. Sense its emptiness without understanding what it meant. A storage space. The knowledge surfaced from nowhere, certain, as my own name, my real name, the one I'd lived with for 34 years. As if gifted by the heavens themselves. I didn't understand it. Couldn't begin to explain it. But before I could even try, a small cough from a back room. Then a woman's voice, thin and rasping. Husband. The word held no hope. No expectation of comfort. Just acknowledgement that someone was moving around and weary preparation for whatever disappointment would follow. I pushed open the back room's door. They were curled together on a straw mat barely thick enough to separate them from the cold floor. The woman, Yuna, her name surfaced from those borrowed memories, had her body wrapped around a small form, protecting her even now, even with nothing left to give. The little girl's lips were cracked and bloodless. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes, when they flickered open, were too large for her face, too old for her age. Bora. Her name was Bora. She was 5 years old. Yuna looked up at me. Her gaze was flat, empty, the gaze of someone who had already buried hope and was simply waiting for the rest of herself to follow. They were dying. Both of them. They had been dying for days. And now, I was the only one standing between them and the end. The storage space inside me pulsed with hollow mockery. Empty when they needed food. Empty when they needed water. Empty when they needed salvation. But not empty of purpose. Never that. I knelt beside them. Not the hesitant kneeling of a man overwhelmed by circumstance. This was different. Automatic. Muscle memory from a body that no longer existed. Knowledge from a life I should not have been able to remember. 2 fingers to Yuna's throat. Her pulse was there. Thready, too fast. The heartbeat of a body consuming itself to stay alive. I lifted her wrist, watched the skin tint when I pinched it. Severe dehydration. 2 days without proper water, maybe 3. The way her eyes tracked me, without focusing, told me everything I needed to know about her blood sugar. She flinched when I touched her. Not from pain, from surprise. Her brow furrowed, confusion cutting through the fog of exhaustion. She looked at my hands like they belonged to a stranger. Harak. Her voice cracked on his name. On my name now. Don't talk. Save your strength. I shifted to Bora. The little girl watched me with those ancient eyes, not moving, barely breathing. Her pulse was faster than her mother's. Worse, children dehydrate faster. Their bodies burn through reserves like kindling. When did she last eat? I asked. Yuna's laugh was a broken thing, a sound that had forgotten what joy felt like. 3 days. 4. I stopped counting. Water. Yesterday. A few sips. I gave her mine. Of course she did. I looked around the shack with new eyes. Not the eyes of a man accepting death. The eyes of someone cataloging resources, calculating survival margins, building a plan from nothing. Tell me everything, I said. Why are we here? Why is no one helping? Yuna stared at me. Something flickered in her gaze. Not hope. Not yet. But the memory of what hope had once felt like. You know why? Tell me again. She was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, like opening a wound that had never properly healed, she spoke. Your father declared you worthless. 2 months ago, at the family gathering, said a man without a spirit root was no man at all. Said you shamed the Cian bloodline by producing only a daughter. Her eyes flicked to Bora, fierce and protective even through exhaustion. Giddick laughed. He always laughed. Cian Giddick. The name surfaced with images that did not belong to me. A broad-shouldered man with the comfortable fat of privilege. A sneer that seemed permanently etched into his face. Flames dancing on his fingertips. Not impressive flames. not the inferno of a true cultivator. But enough. Enough to burn. Enough to terrify. Enough to make a man without magic feel like nothing. He burned my things, I heard myself say. The words came from somewhere deep, from the dregs of Cian Harak's fading memories. The night before we left. Yuna nodded. He burned everything. Your father's old hunting tools. The blankets your mother made before she passed. He said they were contaminated by your weakness. Her voice hardened. Then he escorted us here personally, to this homestead at the mountain's edge. Said the soil was good for tending the spirit fields, that even a worthless man could manage basic cultivation work. Said we should be grateful for his mercy. Mercy. I remembered Giddick's face. As he said it, the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced real consequences. The way fire had curled around his fingers like a pet. A man without a spirit root is no man at all. My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. The village, I said. The other servants. They won't help. They're afraid. The spirit fields keep them bound here, and they have their own families to feed. The mountains have been restless lately. More beast sightings than usual. Everyone hoards what they have. Yuna's eyes finally met mine fully, and I saw the death in them. The acceptance. There is no help coming, Harak. There never was. I stood. The motion made my weakened legs tremble, but I locked my knees and forced stillness into my body. Darren Cole had survived 12 days in the Yukon with a broken compass and half a protein bar. Cian Harak's body was failing, but his mind, my mind, was not. I'm going to find food, I said. Yuna laughed again. That terrible, hollow sound. There is no food. The village won't share. The mountains are death. Even Giddick feared to walk past the treeline, and he has a spirit root. Her voice cracked. You have nothing. You've always had nothing. I didn't argue. Instead, I searched. The shack was barely 10 paces across, but I covered every inch of it. A rusted hand scythe with a blade that had seen better decades, still sharp enough to cut if I put my back into it. A length of frayed rope, perhaps 3 meters, the kind that snapped if you looked at it wrong. A clay water jug with a chip in the rim. Not much. Enough. I found a stream 50 meters from a shack, a thin trickle cutting through rocky soil. The water was clear, cold, mountain-fed. I filled the jug and brought it back. Small sips. I told Yuna, pressing it into her hands. Too much too fast will make you sick. She drank. Bora drank. They watched me with the same expression, confusion warring with something they were afraid to name. I moved to the doorway and studied the mountain's edge. The forgotten mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. Their slopes were thick with vegetation that seemed to shimmer in the fading light, leaves carrying colors that didn't exist in any forest I remembered. The air itself felt different near the treeline, heavier, charged like the moment before a lightning strike. The outer veil, the boundary between survival and suicide. I turned to leave. A small hand caught my sleeve. Bora had crawled to me somehow, her limbs too thin, her grip barely stronger than a breath. She didn't ask me to stay, didn't beg for food. Children who had learned that crying changed nothing didn't waste tears. She just looked at me with those 2 old eyes. Come back. Not a plea, a statement. A child who had learned that people left and didn't return, speaking the words anyway, because some part of her still needed to say them. I crouched to her level. I will. A promise I had no right to make. Then I walked toward the forgotten mountains alone. The treeline swallowed him whole. One moment he stood in the gray light of the servant village's edge. The next he passed through an invisible membrane that changed everything. The air thickened against his skin like walking through warm honey. His lungs drew breath that tasted of copper and ozone, and somewhere deep in his chest, something he couldn't name stirred in response. Cian Harak stopped, listened, cataloged. The trees here weren't right. Their bark shimmered with a faint iridescence, catching light that shouldn't exist beneath this canopy. Veins of soft luminescence traced through the undergrowth like the forest's own circulatory system, pulsing in rhythms that reminded him uncomfortably of a heartbeat. The outer veil, even in its least dangerous zone, the forgotten mountains felt alive in ways that defied the word. Not alive like a healthy forest teeming with ordinary creatures. Alive like something watching, something waiting. He moved forward on instinct honed across 15 years of surviving places that wanted him dead. Each step deliberate, weight distributed to minimize sound, eyes tracking movement in his peripheral vision, while his conscious attention swept the middle distance for threats. A game trail emerged from the undergrowth, faint, barely a suggestion of disturbed earth and bent stems, but unmistakable to someone who knew how to look. Small creatures used this path. Rodents, maybe, or whatever passed for rodents in a place where magic twisted flesh and bone into new configurations. He filed the information away and kept moving. The forest whispered around him. Leaves rustled with no wind. Something chittered in the canopy above, the sound cutting off abruptly when he glanced upward. He caught a flash of eyes, too many eyes, clustered like grapes, before the creature vanished into shadow. Don't engage. Don't provoke. You're not hunting yet. You're learning. Darren's voice in his head, calm and measured, the way it had always been during those first terrifying days in a new wilderness. Panic kills. Knowledge saves. Take your time. Read the land. He read it. The spirit-touched vegetables announced themselves through subtle wrongness. Colors too vivid, growth patterns too perfect. A cluster of tubers pushed through soil that glowed faintly blue around their roots. Herbs nearby displayed leaves edged in silver, catching the dim forest light and throwing it back in ways that hurt to look at directly. Cian crouched beside them. His hands trembled slightly. As he brushed dirt from the tuber's surface, he didn't know if they were safe. Couldn't know. Nothing in Darren's memory covered vegetables that pulsed with inner light. But the growth patterns matched root vegetables he'd eaten 1,000 times across a dozen different biomes. The way the stems connected to the earth, the firmness of the flesh when he pressed his thumb against it, the clean break when he pulled one free. Edible structure, unknown magical properties, calculated risk. He harvested. The makeshift sack filled quickly, tubers, silver-leafed herbs, clusters of what looked almost like glowing wild onions. Enough to feed a family for days if they proved safe to eat. Then he remembered the storage space. He discovered it yesterday, that impossible pocket of elsewhere that opened at his mental command. He still didn't understand how it worked, or why he possessed it, or what rules governed its existence. But understanding could wait. Survival couldn't. He focused, willed, felt that strange connection open like a door in the back of his mind. 3 tubers went into the space. Cian counted to 30, forced himself to breathe slowly despite the hammering of his heart. Then he reached back into that dimensional pocket and pulled out. 6 tubers. His legs nearly buckled beneath him. 6. Doubled. The vegetables had doubled in the span of moments. Perfect copies indistinguishable from the originals. The implications crashed through his mind like a flood breaking through a dam. Food that multiplied. Resources that grew. The difference between his family's slow starvation and their survival sitting in an impossible space that responded to nothing. But his will. He didn't understand the mechanism. Couldn't begin to guess at the rules. But he understood the advantage with crystalline clarity. Everything changes. Interesting. The voice came from behind him. Cian spun, tubers scattering from his grip, body dropping into a defensive crouch before conscious thought could intervene. His eyes found the speaker, an elderly man standing behind a spirit-touched oak, so still that he might have been part of the forest itself. Weathered skin mapped with scars and age lines. A left hand missing 2 fingers, the stumps long healed into smooth nubs of flesh. Eyes that held depth Cian recognized immediately. The look of someone who had seen things that broke other men and survived anyway. Those eyes studied him now with open curiosity. No cultivator gathers vegetables by hand, the old man said. They don't need to. Spirit energy sustains them better than food ever could. He stepped forward, moving with a slight limp that spoke of old injuries never fully healed. Which means you're either someone's servant playing at foraging, or you're exactly what you look like. Cian straightened slowly. What do I look like? Desperate. Starving. A pause. Rootless. The word landed like a blow. Rootless. No spirit root. No cultivation. No magic. No power in a world where power meant everything. I have no spirit root, Cian admitted. The old man laughed. It was a harsh sound, knowing and bitter, carrying the weight of decades spent surviving on the margins of a world that had forgotten him. He settled against the oak's trunk like a man settling into a familiar chair. Mun Siakian, he said, former Stone Stage cultivator. Emphasis on former. Stone Stage. Third tier of cultivation, powerful enough to shatter boulders and outrun horses. Cian's inherited memories supply the context. Stone Stage cultivators were extraordinarily rare, maybe one in the entire region. Former, he asked. Mun raised his maimed left hand. The missing fingers weren't just missing. Cian saw now that the damage extended further, pale scar tissue crawling up the forearm like lightning frozen in flesh. My spirit root shattered 32 years ago, deeper in these mountains than you should ever go. He smiled without warmth. Now I'm just an old man who knows too much about things that no longer concern him. What shattered it? Questions that don't help you survive. Focus. Mun's eyes sharpened. Those vegetables will sustain a body. Filyavali. Stop the worst of the hunger. But they won't rebuild strength. Won't restore what months of starvation have taken from you and yours. He paused meaningfully. For that, you need meat. Spirit-touched meat. The only kind worth hunting in the outer veil. Cian's jaw tightened. I have no weapons. No magic. No training beyond what common sense provides. And yet here you are, gathering food in the place where good men go to die. Mun studied him with renewed interest. Either you're a fool, or you've learned something about survival that the rest of this fearful village has forgotten. The memory of Bora's hand on his sleeve. Her voice, steady despite everything. Come back. I have a daughter who needs to eat. Mun's expression shifted. Something that might have been respect flickered through those ancient eyes. The glimmer bore, he said finally. Faint-level beast. Protective light aura that can blind a man and burn skin. But not lethal like the deeper creatures. Usually too dangerous for someone without cultivation. Usually, one was injured yesterday. Rockslide in the eastern hollow. Caught it in the hindquarters, shattered something important. Mun pointed with his three-fingered hand toward where the sun was slowly climbing. I watched it limp away, trailing silver blood, heading toward the eastern drainage. Cian's mind raced. An injured beast, weakened, possibly dying, still dangerous, but not impossibly so. Its light shield, he said. How does it work? Mun's smile turned almost approving. You asked the right questions. The aura draws on the boar's essence. Bright when it's strong, dim when it's weak. Exhaustion kills the shield faster than any weapon. An injured beast tracked long enough, pushed hard enough, might drop its defenses entirely. Might. Nothing certain in the outer veil. Ever. Mun pushed himself off the tree. But you won't be the only thing hunting injured prey. The mountains have their own predators, and they've learned that weakness draws attention. He turned to leave. Ditsita fast. The blood trail won't last forever. Thank you. Mun paused, looked back over his shoulder with an unreadable expression. Brave or stupid. We'll see which. Then he was gone, vanishing into the shimmer-bark trees, as if the forest had simply absorbed him. Cian stood alone in the glowing undergrowth, the weight of vegetables in his sack, the impossible storage space humming in the back of his mind, and a decision crystallizing in his chest. He turned east. The sun climbed toward its peak. As he walked, casting strange shadows through the iridescent canopy, time passed in careful footsteps and measured breaths. He found a stream that ran silver clear and drank deeply, letting the water, tinged with something that tasted almost like electricity, settle the trembling in his hands. Then he found it, a splash of silver against dark earth, blood that glowed faintly in the filtered light, still wet enough to catch the sun. Boar tracks pressed deep into the soil beside it, the rear prints dragging, evidence of an injured hindquarter, just as Mun had described. The trail led deeper into the mountains, deeper into danger, deeper into the only chance his family had. Cian knelt beside the blood and pressed his fingers against the glowing fluid. It was warm, fresh. He still didn't understand how consuming magical beasts could raise anyone's cultivation. The concept violated everything the inherited memories told him about spirit roots and essence absorption. He still didn't understand the storage space that multiplied his gathered food, or why he specifically possessed it, or what strange rules governed this fragment of a world he'd woken into. But understanding could come later. Right now, a wounded Glimmerboar was bleeding silver somewhere ahead of him, and his daughter was waiting for him to come back. He rose and followed the trail east, into the deepening forest, where the trees grew stranger and the light grew dimmer, and something massive moved through the brush ahead, leaving prints that glowed like captured starlight in its wake. The blood trail told a story of desperation. Silver droplets clung to fallen leaves, each one catching the afternoon light like scattered coins. Broken branches marked where the beast had stumbled. Disturbed earth showed where it had dragged its wounded leg through the undergrowth. Cian followed these signs with the patience of a man who had tracked wounded game across 3 continents in another life, reading the forest floor like familiar scripture. His body screamed at him to stop. Every muscle in Cian Harak's malnourished frame burned with a fire that had nothing to do with cultivation. His lungs ached. His vision swam at the edges when he moved too quickly. The graze on his arm from earlier, where he'd stumbled against a jagged rock, had crusted over with dried blood that cracked when he flexed his fingers. But Darren Cole's mind drove him forward. The blood is getting thicker. It's slowing down. It's close. The trail led him east for what felt like hours, though the sun's position suggested perhaps 90 minutes had passed. The trees grew stranger here, their bark darker, their leaves carrying that faint luminescence he'd noticed before. Spirit-touched, probably. Everything in these mountains carried some trace of the magical catastrophe that had twisted this land. Then he heard it, a low, labored breathing, wet and rattling, the sound of something massive struggling to draw air through damaged lungs. Cian dropped into a crouch, ignoring the way his knees protested. He moved forward with excruciating slowness, placing each foot with deliberate care, until he reached the edge of a rocky hollow carved into the mountainside. The Glimmerboar lay in the center. It was larger than he'd imagined, easily 400 pounds of muscle and tusked fury, its body covered in coarse bristles that shifted between gray and silver, depending on the angle. Patches of luminescent fur dotted its flanks, but they flickered weakly now, like candles guttering in a draft. Its protective light aura, the barrier that had deflected his first attack, sputtered around it in irregular pulses. The trap had done its work. The beast's right hind leg was a ruin of torn muscle and exposed bone where it had ripped itself free from the snare, leaving flesh behind in its panic. Blood pooled beneath it, soaking into the rocky ground. But those tusks, even from here, Cian could see them clearly. Curved ivory, each one, as long as his forearm, stained with dirt and old blood. One good charge, one solid impact, and those tusks would punch through his chest like spears through rice paper. Don't rush. Think. He spent 10 precious minutes circling the hollow, staying downwind, cataloging every detail. 2 exits, one narrow passage between boulders to the north, one wider gap to the south where he'd entered. The boar faced south, its snout twitching. As it scented the air, its eyesight would be poor, he knew. Wild boar relied on smell and sound far more than vision. The narrow northern passage was perfect. Cian retreated silently, making his way around the hollow's perimeter until he reached the northern exit. The gap between the boulders was barely wide enough for the boar to squeeze through, a natural choke point that would limit its mobility, slow its charge. He uncoiled the rope from his waist. His fingers remembered knots from a lifetime ago. A simple snare loop, anchored to a boulder, positioned at leg height across the passage. Not strong enough to hold the beast for long. But it didn't need to. It only needed to trip it, to give him one clean moment. He positioned himself beside the passage, scythe raised, and picked up a fist-sized stone. One throw, one chance. The rock sailed through the air and cracked against the far wall of the hollow. The glimmer boar surged upward with a squeal that echoed off the rocks like thunder. Its aura flared bright for a single heartbeat, brilliant silver light that made Cian's eyes water before guttering back to almost nothing. The beast swung its massive head toward the sound, nostrils flaring, and charged. Straight toward him, straight toward the snare. Its injured leg hit the rope first. The beast stumbled, its momentum carrying it forward even, as its balance failed, and for one perfect moment it was falling, thrashing, those deadly tusks pointing at nothing. But empty air. Cian moved. The scythe bit into the boar's neck with a wet crack. Not deep enough. The beast screamed and twisted, and one tusk grazed Cian's arm, tearing through cloth and skin in a line of white-hot pain. He didn't stop. Couldn't stop. He wrenched the blade free and struck again, aiming for the same spot, widening the wound. Blood sprayed across his face. The boar thrashed, nearly throwing him backward. Its hooves scrabbled against stone. Its aura flickered one last time, a desperate pulse of silver light that pushed against him like a physical force. And then Cian's third strike found the artery. The creature's death cry echoed through the hollow, bouncing off stone walls, carrying far into the forest beyond. Then silence. The glimmer boar's light faded completely, leaving only a massive corpse bleeding silver into the mountain stone. Cian collapsed beside it. His chest heaved. His arm throbbed where the tusk had grazed him. Blood, his own, dripped from his fingers to mingle with the beast's on the ground. Every inch of his body screamed with exhaustion, with the accumulated debt of pushing a starving man's frame far beyond its limits. But he was alive. He'd killed a magical beast. Him, a man with no spirit root, no cultivation, no magic of any kind, armed with nothing but a farming tool and 15 years of survival knowledge from a world that didn't exist here. He laughed. The sound came out broken, closer to a sob than anything joyful. Then the warmth hit him. It started in his chest, a spreading heat that had nothing to do with exertion. His wounds throbbed less acutely. His exhaustion lifted by a fraction. And deep inside him, in a place he couldn't name, but somehow knew existed, something expanded, growing denser, growing stronger. Cian looked at his trembling hands in wonder. The cuts on his palms were already scabbing over, healing faster than they should. His breathing came easier now, despite the ordeal he'd just survived. Has consuming this magical beast somehow raised my cultivation? But that was impossible. The inherited memories were absolutely clear on this point. Without a spirit root, a person couldn't absorb essence, couldn't cultivate, couldn't grow stronger through any means known to this world. Yet the evidence was undeniable. He could feel it, something awakening inside him that had no right to exist. A branch snapped in the forest behind him. Cian's head whipped around, every survival instinct screaming to full alert. The sound had come from the south, from deeper in the outer vale. Heavy footsteps, something moving through the undergrowth with no attempt at stealth. Something that had heard the boar's death cry. Something bigger. Cian didn't wait to see what was coming. His hands moved before his mind caught up. 15 years of survival instinct screaming that curiosity kills and caution keeps you breathing. The scythe blade bit into the boar's haunch, the cuts rough and ugly, but functional. He wasn't a butcher. He was a desperate man with 30 seconds before something worse arrived. The sounds multiplied. Not one creature. Several. Moving through the undergrowth with the confidence of apex predators who had never learned fear. Cian's peripheral vision caught movement between the trees, shapes that defied easy categorization. Too many limbs. Too many eyes catching the failing light with an oily gleam. Scavengers. Drawn by the death cry and the copper-sweet smell of spirit-touched blood. He wrenched free a haunch, then another. The organ meat came next, liver, heart, kidneys. Precious nutrition that starving bodies needed. His hands were slick with blood, his grip failing on the scythe's worn handle. But he didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Bore his face. Yuna's hollow eyes. The meat went onto his back, roughly 30 pounds wrapped in leaves and secured with strips torn from his own shirt. His body protested immediately. The strange new strength that had awakened wasn't enough to make this easy, only possible. The weight threatened to drive him to his knees. But there was more meat. Too much to carry. Too precious to leave. The storage space. Cian grabbed the remaining portions and willed them into that impossible pocket of nothingness inside his mind. They vanished. Gone. As if they'd never existed. And then he gasped. The space inside had changed. Before, he'd sensed perhaps 15 pounds of meat waiting there. Now there was 30. The exact amount he'd just added had somehow doubled the total, creating more from nothing. More than he'd extracted from the boar's carcass. More than should exist in any rational world. A branch snapped 20 feet away. Questions later. Run now. Cian crashed through the underbrush with all the grace of a wounded deer, which is to say none at all. The weight on his back pitched him forward with every stride. Roots grabbed at his ankles. Low branches whipped his face, opening cuts that bled freely into his eyes. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit grew. Chittering calls that might have been communication, the heavy thud of bodies following his path. But they weren't gaining. He was faster than he should be, stronger than this broken body had any right to be. The cultivation that had risen inside him, impossible, unexplainable, real, was burning through his muscles like fire, pushing him beyond limits that should have dropped him 100 yards ago. The forest blurred. Time became meaningless. There was only the next step, the next breath, the next desperate surge forward. The light changed. The trees thinned. Cian burst from the outer veil's edge. As dusk painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, and behind him, nothing. The creatures had stopped at the forest's boundary, unwilling or unable to follow beyond the veil's cover. He caught a final glimpse of those too many eyes watching from the shadows, patient and hungry, before the darkness swallowed them completely. He didn't stop, couldn't stop, not until the shack materialized from the gloom like a fever dream, its broken door hanging open where he'd left it. Cian crashed through that door and collapsed. Una screamed. The sound cut through the fog of exhaustion like a blade, and Cian forced his head up to find her pressed against the far wall, hands over her mouth, eyes wide with horror. He realized how he must look, covered head to toe in blood, some the boar's rich crimson, some his own darker shade leaking from a dozen wounds. A monster wearing her husband's face. Una. Then she saw what he was carrying. Her scream died. Her hands fell away from her mouth. Those hollow eyes, eyes that had watched hope die by inches over months of slow starvation. Fixed on the meat with an expression Cian would carry with him for the rest of this impossible life. Disbelief becoming belief. Despair becoming something else entirely. Is that? Her voice cracked. Cian, is that real? He pulled himself to his knees. Every muscle screamed. Every joint protested. But his hands were already moving, already gathering wood for a fire, already doing what had to be done next. It's real, he said. Help me. The fire took forever to catch, and no time at all. Cian's fingers shook so badly he could barely hold the flint. But the sparks flew true, and the kindling caught, and the small flame became something stronger. He positioned the meat carefully. Small portions, well done, the way you cook game for the starving. Protein shock could kill, as surely as hunger if you fed too much too fast to systems that had forgotten how to digest real food. Bora had crept from the corner where she'd been sleeping, those two knowing eyes watching everything. She didn't ask questions, didn't cry, just waited with the terrible patience of a child who had learned that wanting didn't make food appear. The meat sizzled, fat dripped and hissed, and Cian frowned. The spirit touched, meat glowed. Even cooked, even charred at the edges, it gave off a faint luminescence that had nothing to do with the firelight. Magical essence baked into every fiber, every cell. He fed Bora first. The little girl ate without speaking, tears running down her cheeks in silent streams. Each bite was methodical, careful, as if she didn't quite believe the meat wouldn't vanish from her hands. When she finished her portion, she looked up at Cian with an expression that shattered something inside his chest. Trust, pure and absolute. Yuna ate next, her portion just as small despite the desperate hunger in her eyes. She understood the danger of eating too much too fast. She understood because she had watched her husband nearly die trying to protect them, and she would not waste his sacrifice. The change was almost immediate. Color flooded their faces with supernatural speed. The gray pallor of starvation faded like mist in morning sun. Bora's cheeks gained a hint of healthy flush. Yuna's skin lost the papery quality that had made her look decades older than her years. Spirit touched meat. Magical essence converted directly into vitality. Cian watched them transform and felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't known since waking in this impossible world. They would survive tonight. They would survive tomorrow. The meat in his storage space, doubled by that inexplicable property, would last them weeks if rationed carefully. Weeks of breathing room. Weeks to plan, to grow stronger, to unravel the mystery of what was happening to him. The fire burned lower. Bora's eyes grew heavy, her belly full for the first time in days. She curled against her mother's side like a kitten seeking warmth and slipped into sleep with such sudden completeness that Cian almost checked her breathing. But she was fine. She was alive. She would wake tomorrow without the gnawing emptiness that had haunted her dreams. The silence stretched between Cian and Yuna like a living thing. She was watching him again, not with horror anymore, not with confusion either. Something more complicated lived in those dark eyes. Something that might have been the first fragile seeds of belief. Who are you? The question came softly, barely louder than the crackling embers. But Cian heard the weight behind it, heard everything she was really asking. The old Cian Harak, the real one, would never have done this. Could never have done this. That man had been a shell, a failure, someone who had surrendered to slow death rather than fight against impossible odds. This world had broken him long before the hunger finished the job. But Cian wasn't that man. He looked down at his blood-caked hands, at the scars that weren't his, the calluses that told stories he hadn't lived. Darren Cole had died in a frozen wilderness on a world so far from here it might as well have been a fever dream. Cian Harak had died too, in his own way, the moment whatever force had placed Darren's consciousness in this failing body. So what was left? Something new, something impossible. A man with 15 years of survival expertise and no spirit root, who had somehow killed a magical beast and felt his cultivation rise. A man with a storage space that broke every law of equivalent exchange. A man who had no right to exist in a world where such things simply did not happen. I don't know, he said honestly. The words hurt coming out, but lies would hurt worse. I'm not who I was. Something changed. I don't understand how or why, but I know what I'm going to do with it. Yuna didn't look away. What? Cian turned to look at Bora, really look at her. This child who wasn't his daughter, but was his daughter now. This fragile life that depended entirely on choices he hadn't made and a legacy he'd inherited without consent. Her chest rose and fell with the easy rhythm of dreamless sleep, and something in Cian's chest cracked open. I'm going to feed them, he said. I'm going to protect them. I'm going to make sure they never look at me the way they looked at the old me, like a man who had already given up. He met Yuna's eyes, and whatever she saw there must have answered questions she hadn't asked aloud. I'm someone who will never let them starve again. Outside, the forgotten mountains loomed against the star-scattered sky. Massive and dark, they seemed to swallow the light at their edges, a wall of shadow that had devoured hundreds of would-be hunters over the decades. The servant villages lived in terror of those peaks, and rightly so, but Cian looked at them without fear. Confusion, yes, because nothing about his situation made sense. Calculation, too, because there was more meat in those mountains, more spirit-touched beasts, more opportunities to test this impossible power growing inside him. The storage space waited like a promise of abundance. His rising cultivation waited like a weapon he didn't know how to use. This is only the beginning. He believed it. For the first time since waking in Cian Harak's body, he truly believed it. Then the door exploded inward. Cian moved before thought, placing himself between the entrance and his family, the bloody scythe already in his hands. Bora woke screaming. Yuna grabbed her daughter and pulled her back against the wall. Firelight caught the figure standing in the shattered doorway, a broad-shouldered man with a perpetual sneer and the comfortable fat of someone who had never known hunger. Flames danced along his fingertips, small, but real, casting orange shadows across features twisted with cruel amusement. Cian Giddick, elder brother, cultivator, one of only two in the entire region. The man Cian's inherited memories had learned to fear. Well, Giddick's voice dripped with mock surprise as his eyes swept the room. The fire, the cooked meat, the evidence of a successful hunt that should have been impossible. His gaze settled on Cian with sudden, sharp interest. Little brother, the family waste. The man with no spirit root who was supposed to die quietly with his failures. Flames climbed higher along his fingers. Someone wants to explain to me how a rootless nobody managed to kill a glimmer boar?